Top of the Morning Show. We're here in beautiful Rodanthe, North Carolina, and we have a very special show lined up for you today. So don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
Most of the local settlers here on the island were descendants of shipwreck survivors. And that is true in a couple of cases, but not always. And I'm going to give you a good example of that right here. In water here. And so they ended up over here beginning about 1698. Now here on our left, these little trees, you see here the little oval leaves, the lime green, I mean right out the window, they're touching the window almost there. That's called Yaupon. We learned from the Indians how to make Yaupon tea. And John Lawson called it the black drink when he was here in April of 1701. It was John Lawson who discovered the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Indians. He said that I was shocked and amazed to find ye Hatteras Indians with light complexions and gray eyes. And the Indian king who did the talking, Kinnicky, told Lawson in April of 1701 that our ancestors could talk in a book as the white man does. In other words, they could read. I remember hearing that on the John Wayne movie, years ago when I was a kid, and then later on I found out, my God, whoever produced that movie knew something about John Lawson's book.
Welcome to another episode of Top of the Morning Show. We're here in beautiful Rodanthe, North Carolina, and with me is the local historian, and your name again, sir, is?
I'm Danny Cal. It's good to be here.
It's great to have you here with us, and I'm just really looking forward and anxious to hear what you have to tell us about this beautiful, beautiful place.
Thank you. You can go back over 500 years ago. We can go to the year 1492. Christopher Columbus is riding the Gulf Stream north on his way back to Spain. If you take a Rand McNally atlas and lay a ruler, one end at Manhattan, the other end at Miami, you'll see that you are 38 miles out into the open water. So, Columbus is riding by. We're sticking way out in the water here. Our Native Americans, the local people that were living here at that time, were the first to know that there's someone else out there. This was the first contact between Native Americans and white European settlers occurred right here on this island.
That's amazing. That is really amazing. My son and his bride were just married here with a Native American ceremony.
We have a lot of Indian history. Chickamaucomico, as you know, you may have heard, means place of sinking down sand or place of shifting sand. My Uncle Robert always says, "Oh, let them land. What could one or two ships possibly hurt?" That's the real meaning of Chickamaucomico.
Wow, that's very interesting. And how long have you been here?
I've lived here all my life. I'm 48 years old. This is the only home I've ever known. A lot of the stories that I do here on the island I have picked up from old-timers. I've done hundreds of interviews. I've written about 140 some stories for some of the local papers here. The history here, to say the least, is compelling. There are so many stories that have been saved with a lot of the old-timers who have been passing these stories down from generation upon generation. And I love to impart these stories to our visitors.
Can you tell us one?
Absolutely. Sir Walter Raleigh, with the Sir Walter Raleigh expeditions, even though he did not come here, he financed these expeditions. Now, there's a good chance we're speaking Spanish in this country if it were not for the activity that they did up here on Roanoke Island, about 22 miles from here. That was the first attempt at English colonization here, and it's because of those efforts, and Jamestown followed 20 years later, that we have such a strong English background in these United States. It could very well have been Spanish, it could very well have been French.
Wow, that's very interesting. We can hardly wait to hear more, but in the meantime, we are going to take a little sneak peek about some of the beautiful island of Rodanthe.
About 8 out of 10 of the families that we have here, living here now, actually came over here during the Tuscarora Indian War, which went from 1698 to 1715. The Tuscarora managed to organized 22 different Indian tribes, the Coree, the Machipungo, the Mattamuskeet, the Tampicots, the Chilliwack, the News, Perquimans, all the Pasquotanks, all these different guys, and they put aside all their clan differences and resolved as one to run the white man off the mainland, and that's exactly what they did. Now, those settlers who were on the mainland had already been trading with the Hatteras Indians over here, who they knew they were friendly. They knew the area had 3 corn crops a year because we have a semi-tropical environment. We also knew that there was plenty of water here. And so they ended up over here beginning about 1698. Now here on our left, these little trees, you see here the little oval leaves, the lime green, I mean right out the window, they're touching the window almost there. That's called Yaupon. We learned from the Indians how to make Yaupon tea. And John Lawson called it the black drink when he was here in April of 1701. It was John Lawson who discovered the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Indians. He said that, I was shocked and amazed to find ye Hatteras Indians with light complexions and gray eyes. And that the Indian king who did the talking, Kinnikee, told Lawson in April of 1701 that our ancestors could talk in a book as the white man does. In other words, they could read. I remember hearing that on a John Wayne movie, years ago when I was a kid, and then later on I found out, my God, whoever produced that movie knew something about John Lawson's book. But this area is just full of Yaupon. All you had to do was pull these little oval-shaped leaves out, dry them out, chop them up into tea bag, literally into dust, put it in hot water, and you've got a drink. It's very good with milk in it, some kind of cream. It will turn your teeth black, and that's the stigma that went with it. And I want to point out just one other thing. This is, I come down here at night about dark on my ghost tour. I got 8 different tours that I do. This is the Hobnail Boot Ghost is right here. The gentleman that owns this house, and he's in there right now, and he's actually told people on my bus before that it was a February night. It was in 1987. His dog King was a German Shepherd. His German Shepherd at that time. It was cold. The wind was out of the northwest. It was not this.
Cape Hatteras National Seashore is really more than just a beautiful beach. We have some compelling history, to say the least. This is the site of the first flight. This is the site of many of the famous maritime rescues that we had here. The famous mantra of the United States Coast Guard. You may have heard these famous words uttered before, that the regulations say you have to go, but they don't say a thing about coming back. Those were actually uttered on this beach. We have the initial SOS from the Titanic was actually received here April 12th, 1914. The very first weather station that we ever had in the United States was right here. A lot of groundbreaking meteorological work was done here.
Danny, that was so exciting. Now, let's go back to another part of the tour.
We're more than just a beautiful beach here. The history we have on the Outer Banks of North Carolina is compelling, to say the least. We have all sorts of maritime history. We have history with our Native Americans. The very first contact between white European settlers and Native Americans occurred here. We are the site of the very first flight. We have the first official weather station ever constructed. The United States Weather Bureau office constructed the very first station here on Hatteras Island. This was the initial victory here by the Union Army, the very first victory, indeed the very first victory of any kind by the Union Army during the Civil War occurred here August 29, 1861 with the Battle of Hatteras Inlet. It was the largest naval bombardment known to mankind up until that time, when the entire Union fleet appeared off of Hatteras Inlet and bombarded Fort Hatteras for 4.5 hours. It's estimated by Civil War historians that every 4 seconds, anything from 12-pound grape shot cannonballs to 100-pound Dahlgren shells exploded in and around the fort. This was also the first engagement in the Civil War featuring African Americans. The very first freedmen's colony was right here on Hatteras Island, set up by the Union soldiers for slaves who escaped over from the mainland seeking safe haven over on the Outer Banks.
Great vantage point going for our Native Americans. They could see ships coming out of sight and appearing right on the edge of the tip here because there's a channel, a very deep channel, about anywhere from 80 to 125 feet, that runs only about a mile. You can actually see the break in it. If you look over top of that trailer, you'll see some white breakers on your left. Then you'll see some white breakers on your right. See the deep water that runs through the middle there? It was Christopher Columbus that discovered that right over top of that trailer on our left. Columbus left, and thank goodness he left meticulous notes, but in his notes, he wrote that he saw a pod of porpoises. What they call, actually, dolphin is a Spanish name. And because of these whales, dolphins, and porpoises and stuff, they didn't like getting up on that shallow shore water, 5, 6, 7 foot shore water, because like anybody else, these mammals have soft undersides. But they would go through the deep water. So here's Columbus anchored, wondering how he's going to negotiate that shoal section there when he sees these pod of porpoises and dolphins swim by. And he followed them right on through the deep water, therefore saved himself as much as a day's sail to the outside, out in the open ocean, to get around those treacherous shoals. Well, guys, you got about 20 minutes on a 3-hour tour. A 3-hour tour. On our schedules, that's the best we're going to be able to do.
Now, wasn't that really great? Now, we have more for you coming up, so stay tuned.
We have a lot of history here that deals also with geology. The Outer Banks was formed 17,000 years ago during the fourth and final ice age, what coastal geologists call today the Pleistocene era. We had woolly mammoths and saber-toothed tigers roaming the coastal plain here. Now, as you know, during the ice age, the world's oceans froze. Here on our side, here in the mid-Atlantic, the Atlantic Ocean froze. All that ocean water gathered as a solid ice mass at the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. As that ice retreated over a 2,500 year period, it pulled on the trailing edge all this glacial action, these finely crushed sands and sediments. And once those sands and sediments settled in to the Atlantic Basin right out here on our left, they left behind these huge, vast geologic sand deposits that we know today as the Outer Banks.
Okay, let's go over and see what the beach used to look like before our dunes were built. Did I hear an arg back there?
She heard an arg. She said, "Go on."
Here's some persimmons right here. The Indians ate these. They're just ripening up. They're actually now when they're hard, they're very, very bitter. But when they're mushy, they're pretty doggone good. Has a taste somewhat reminiscent of pumpkins. Now, when they did the home site on this house on the left here, they found a whole bunch of pottery shards and some stone stuff. Anytime you find a stone here, it's either a ballast stone, number one, from after settlement began here, early 1700s, or it's something that the Indians traded for. Now, Carl's got some stuff in there he's found on his property, here in his museum here on the right. And this on our left, this is called the Great Ridge Conservation Corps and the WPA, the Works Progress Administration. Here's our airstrip over here. They've got those porta-johns in there now. I guess we'll have to go with Frisco International. Here's where we get all our weather right here on the right. That's the NOAA. Everything you read on the Weather Channel about conditions at Cape Hatteras comes from that computer-generated site. There are 6 ridges that parallel each other running down the south center of the island. This is the highest. I'm going to show you the highest point on the island back in here. But our real purpose for coming down here is I would like to show you how the Barrier Island beach system looked before the man-made engineering arrived here in 1934. These dunes that you have on the ocean front were man-made, built during the Depression by the CCC. Okay, now this, if you could remove here on our right, as we ride up here about the next half mile to a mile, you can remove all these trees. If you can throw in some cattle, some horses, some wild banker ponies, goats, hogs, sheep, all this livestock roamed free on the island, and they ate down all the vegetation. There was natural forage. But this is the way things used to look here.
The Cape Hatteras National Seashore, in addition to be a rising star in coastal resorts here on the United States, also has some fantastic wildlife refuges, lots of kayaking, lots of hiking. We have the Pea Island National Wildlife Refuge, which is the crown jewel of wildfowl refuges here in the United States. It's a little known but very true fact that the Cape Hatteras National Seashore is the only national park in the United States that has a substantial amount of private property within it. Fortunately, the 72-mile length of the Cape Hatteras National Seashore, featuring Hatteras and Ocracoke Islands, 65% of these two islands belong to the federal government. You have roughly 10% that belongs to the state of North Carolina and the county of Dare, and about 8% of what is just flat-out wetlands. That only leaves about 17% of the Cape Hatteras National Seashore that is open for development. It is a fantastic balance. We have many things to offer our vacationers, but we also have a lot of the modern luxuries that people who want to come enjoy a first-rate, great quality of life vacation can enjoy here, thanks to the fact that we have been able to balance conservation and development.
Now, there's no electricity and no hot water. They do have some solar panels, but you better have that. If you like warm water, you better have that shower taken by 6 o'clock in the evening. But they still get $22 a night. I never get tired of riding through here. To me, this is just absolutely stunning. Real beautiful. Just think about how much better it would be if it didn't have a campground in it. Okay, we'll be making our way up the Great Ridge now. Okay, we learned how to make wine from the Indians, scuppernongs. Here is a scuppernong grapevine, just part of it there on the left. When I was a kid, you guys, I mean, you literally, this campground was opened in 1967, but we'll see little vestiges of them here. These scuppernong leaves here, that thing's not strong enough to produce grapes, but they were all over the place through here. And I don't know if you ever had scuppernong on your way out of town. If you want to stop at Native Vine once you cross over the Currituck Bridge, he's got about 8 different local North Carolina wines, and we learned so much from the Native Americans. We really did. Okay, on our left you'll get some good views of the ocean. The clouds, you'll see that there's no real clouds on our left up in the air until you get out on top of the ocean. That's the Gulf Stream. The Gulf Stream is 84 degrees year-round.
Now, wasn't that really great? Now we have more for you coming up, so stay tuned.
The Chickamaucomico 1874 life-saving station. It was the first operational station in the state of North Carolina. It's only one of 2 in America that's open to the public as a museum. We're on the inside of the 1874 station now, and almost no restoration has been done, or very little has been done here. So what you see is an awful lot of the way it looked like when we inherited in 1874. This wall was recently added, and as you can tell, that does separate the equipment room from this room. This was called the day room, and I jokingly say it was their breakfast room, their lunch room, their supper room, their break room. It was the only room they had, and for many, many years. And so if you can see this lighter square that I'm standing on, this is called the ghost mark, and what that was a tin plate was on the floor that held the cook stove. So for 18 years, the men lived in this building in hot Rodanthe, Hatteras Island summers with a cook stove going from a cookhouse, and finally in 1892 they did get a cookhouse. Through this door would be the equipment room, and this would be the heart of the station. It would house something called a surf boat, which is commonly called a lifeboat, but this was not a lifeboat. This was specifically designed for ocean rescue. This right here, when we go out to the 1874 station, you're going to hear a brief version of the story of the Merlo rescue, which was headed by the keeper, John Allen Midget Jr. It became the most highly awarded maritime rescue in American history. They saved 42 out of the 51 crew of British tanker, the Merlo. All the men got awards, and Captain Johnny, which the man called him, John Allen Midget Jr., received a silver loving cup from the British government as a personal honor of their gratitude for his leadership in that role. And this has been in the Midget family for years and years and years. It still belongs to them, but they have graciously allowed us to display it.
Midget Realty is owned by the Midget family. That is M-I-D-G-E-T-T. The Midget family has been on the Outer Banks since the recorded history here. The Midget family can trace their ancestry back to 1704 to a French Huguenot, a French Protestant, by the name of Mathieu Midget. He was here with his family. He had many children, and his descendants are still here today. The Cape Hatteras National Seashore here on Hatteras and Ocracoke Islands, we are so very proud of the fact that the names that were here 300, 350 years ago are the very same names that are here today. Time marches on, but the Outer Banks and the Outer Bankers are here with it.
You know, you guys just plan your family vacation down here next year, and we'll get I mean, we didn't even get to Hatteras Village. You didn't even get the local side of the lighthouse. You got one of 6 ghost stories that I do, and I just blew through that Hobnail Boot Ghost story there. We actually have a clue about the origin of that. We do know that there was a hanging down in that neighborhood in 1822. A man named Absalom Scarborough was a livestocker, and the Pointer family, P-O-I-N-E-R, we pronounce it Pointer, but in the old island vernacular, just like Smith's Island and Wallops Island and Tangier Island, all there in the Chesapeake, they have their own little vernacular, and Pointer in the old days was pronounced Piney. It's like, Tom Piney, Albert Piney, but it's spelled Pointer, P-O-I-N-E-R. But the 2 Pointer boys had been rustling Scarborough's cattle and other animals as well, and he caught one of the Pointer boys' wife with sheep there on a loop making and he found the carcass. The carcass did indeed have his mark on it, and in a fit of rage, he strangled one of those 2 boys. The other boy got away and witnessed it. Absalom was convicted by a jury here in what was then called Hyde County, and it was just pure convenience that 4 of the 6 jurors were related to the Pointers. So 4-2, he was sentenced to hang, and he was hung in that neighborhood. So even though they call it the Hobnail Boot Ghost, there's some basis for the fact that perhaps it's the ghost of Absalom Scarborough.
The Barrier Island landscape that we have here on the Outer Banks of North Carolina is the most dynamic landscape that we have on the planet. The inlets that we have here on the Outer Banks are constantly open and closing. You have 2 great oceanic currents that affect our area tremendously. Our area is shaped by wind and water. Flowing northbound out of the Caribbean is the Gulf Stream, a tropical flow of water that keeps our temperature here semi-tropical. Now flowing southbound out of the Canadian Maritimes is the Labrador Current. Both of these currents flow in the neighborhood of 4 to 6 knots an hour. So your old sailing ships who could go about 6 to 8 knots an hour, but then you add that 4 to 6 knots of current on top of the sailing speed, they could make very good time by here. And because we stick so far out here, it was just a setup for not only some great natural aesthetics, but also some of the most fascinating maritime history that we have on the Outer Banks.
Know that there was a hanging down in that neighborhood in 1822. A man named Absalom Scarborough was a livestocker, and the Pointer family, P-O-Y-N-E-R. We pronounce it Pointer, but in the old island vernacular, just like Smith's Island and Wallops Island and Tangier Island, all there in the Chesapeake, they have their own little vernacular. And Pointer in the old days was pronounced Piney. It's like, Tom Piney, Albert Piney, but it's still Pointer, P-O-Y-N-E-R. But the two Pointer boys have been rustling Scarborough's cattle and other animals as well. And he caught one of the Pointer boys' wife with sheep there on a loom making and he found the carcass. The carcass did indeed have his mark on it, and in a fit of rage, he strangled one of those two boys. The other boy got away and witnessed it. Absalom was convicted by a jury here in what was then called Hyde County, and it was just pure convenience that 4 of the 6 jurors were related to the Pointers. So 4 to 2, he was sentenced to hang, and he was hung in that neighborhood. So even though they call it the Hobnail Boot Ghost, there's some basis for the fact that perhaps it's the ghost of Absalom Scarborough looking for his sheep carcasses.
Wasn't that exciting and beautiful? And we want to thank you so much, Danny, for being here with us today and sharing what is in your heart with us about this beautiful place. Do you have any last words you'd like to give us?
My pleasure, Sam. We all know about Orville and Wilbur Wright, how about 32 miles from here they did the very first flight. The very first powered flight occurred on these very sands. But it's a little known fact that in addition to Orville and Wilbur Wright, here on Hatteras Island on the Outer Banks of North Carolina at the very same time was a gentleman by the name of Reginald Fessenden, who invented the forerunner of radio. It was called wireless. Working with him was a first-generation Italian immigrant by the name of Guglielmo Marconi, who bought out all of Fessenden's patents and set up the Marconi Company. Working for Marconi was Lee DeForest, who invented the picture tube, the forerunner of television. Visiting in 1904 was Thomas Edison Sr. and Thomas Edison Jr. So from 1903 through 1905, the early part of 1905, we had 7 of the greatest inventive minds of the 20th century, all on the Outer Banks here at one time.
Wow, that is amazing. Going from the spirituality of Native Americans to the special honored guests of such distinguished gentlemen.
We've got it all. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here with us. And we thank you for being here with us today at Top of the Morning. Bye-bye.